The arena was filled with roaring alien spectators. They were here for a show, for a battle that was already decided in their minds. On one side stood a towering reptilian beast, a creature of war, genetically modified for destruction. Muscles rippled under its scaly hide, and its glowing red eyes locked onto its prey with cruel amusement. On the other side was a tiny, harmless-looking creature. It belonged to a human. The aliens laughed, some even placing last-minute bets. "What kind of fool enters an arena with that?" one of them mocked. The small creature, a quadruped, covered in soft fur, stood motionless. Its big, curious eyes darted around the unfamiliar battleground, sniffing the air. It didn't seem to understand the danger. Its owner, a lone human standing outside the ring, clenched his fists. His face remained unreadable, but those who knew humans would recognize the dangerous glint in his eyes. The referee signaled the start of the match. The reptilian beast let out a deafening roar and charged forward, ready to crush its pathetic opponent in a single strike. The crowd cheered for blood. The tiny creature tilted its head. It didn't run. It didn't fight back. The beast swung a massive claw, aiming to end the fight instantly. And then, something impossible happened. Right before impact, the tiny creature vanished. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The beast's claws met nothing but empty air. Confused, it snarled, scanning the arena. Then, slash! A deep cut appeared across its arm. The beast howled in pain, staggering back. The tiny creature was no longer where it had been. It had reappeared behind the beast. The human smiled slightly. The spectators stopped laughing. This wasn't just a harmless pet. Something was wrong. Something had changed. And the battle had only just begun. The evolution no one saw coming. The crowd had gone silent. A moment ago, they were laughing. Now, they were afraid. The towering reptilian beast clutched its wounded arm, its massive form trembling with rage. Its thick hide, strong enough to withstand plasma weapons, had been cut open like paper. And the worst part? It had no idea how. The tiny creature that stood before it was not the same harmless pet it had been a few seconds ago. Something had changed. The human outside the arena crossed his arms, watching calmly. His pet had been small, soft, and unthreatening before, but now, it moved like a phantom. The beast charged again, roaring so loud the ground trembled. This time, it wouldn't miss. But the moment its claws struck, its entire arm went numb. The crowd gasped as a sharp, metallic sound echoed through the arena. The reptilian staggered back, looking at its own claw. It was cracked. Cracked. Its claws, built to tear through steel, had met something stronger. The tiny creature stood there, its fur shifting, its eyes glowing faintly. And then, before their eyes, it began to change. Its small body expanded, muscle fibers thickening, its fur sharpening like blades. Its pupils, once round and soft, became slitted, predatory. The harmless pet had evolved. A low growl rumbled from its throat, but it was not the sound of a scared animal. It was a challenge. The reptilian beast, once a feared champion, felt something it had never felt before. Fear. For the first time, it hesitated. And the human? He smiled. This fight was already over. When the predator becomes the prey. The arena was no longer filled with cheers. It was filled with silence. Deep, suffocating silence. The reptilian beast, once the undisputed champion of this battleground, stood frozen. Its bloodied claw twitched, its thick tail lashed nervously behind it. This wasn't how the fight was supposed to go. It had charged in expecting an easy kill. Now, it was the one being hunted. The small, fragile-looking pet was gone. In its place stood something else. Something unnatural. Its once soft fur had hardened into razor-sharp quills. The harmless round eyes had turned into cold, slitted orbs, void of fear, full of hunger. Its tiny frame had stretched just slightly, enough to be fast, deadly, and something no one had ever seen before. And then it moved. Not ran. Not jumped. It vanished. The reptilian flinched, swinging wildly at the empty space where the creature had been. Too late. A slash tore through its back. The beast roared in agony, spinning around, but there was nothing. Then, another strike. This time to its leg. Deep, precise. The crowd finally understood. This wasn't a pet anymore. It was a predator. The reptilian beast staggered, panting hard. Its once proud posture sagged as blood dripped onto the arena floor. And then, the little creature did something terrifying. It smiled. Not in an animalistic, instinctive way. But in a way that said, "I know exactly what I'm doing." The human standing outside the ring exhaled slowly, watching his pet, no, his creation, turn the tides of battle with terrifying efficiency. The audience, the other aliens, even the announcer who had been mocking the human just minutes ago, no one was laughing now. Because they all saw the truth. The real fight hadn't even started yet. And the monster they had unleashed was still evolving. The moment they realized. It was too late. The arena smelled of blood. Not human blood. Alien blood. It dripped from the massive reptilian's wounds, pooling at its clawed feet. The beast's chest heaved with labored breaths, its eyes darting wildly, searching. But there was nothing to see. Because the thing it was fighting was too fast. The audience had stopped breathing. This was no longer entertainment. This was a lesson. And the lesson was simple. Never underestimate a human's creation. The tiny pet, the creature they had mocked, was no longer tiny. Its soft fur had hardened into overlapping plates, shifting like living armor. Its once small limbs were now lean, muscular, designed for pure efficiency. But the worst part? It was playing with its prey. The reptilian swung its claws again, desperate, unfocused. It had abandoned technique. Now it was just trying to survive. It failed. Crack. The sound was sickening. The audience flinched as the beast's arm bent the wrong way. A howl of pain. A blur of motion. And then, silence. The once mighty reptilian collapsed to its knees. Shaking. Bleeding. Terrified. The human, still standing outside the ring, watched without a word. His pet had been small, fragile. It had been a joke to the alien spectators. But they had forgotten something critical. Humans don't keep weak pets. They train weapons. And now, the weapon stood in front of its broken enemy. Staring. Waiting. The reptilian let out a choked breath. It knew what was about to happen. So did the crowd. But before the killing blow could land, the human finally spoke. "That's enough." Instantly, the creature froze. The silence in the arena deepened. The beast, the hunter that had been turned into prey, watched as its opponent calmly obeyed. It could have killed. It chose not to, not because it wasn't capable, but because the human had commanded it. And that was far more terrifying than anything else. Because it meant the real danger wasn't the creature. It was the human who controlled it. The fear they couldn't forget. The arena was dead silent. Not the kind of silence before a battle. The kind of silence after a nightmare. The towering reptilian warrior, once feared by all, lay motionless, shaking. Its enormous body, built for war, refused to move. It had never known fear before today. Now. It would never forget it. The human's pet, no, his weapon, stood completely still. Not because it was weak. Not because it was tired. But because its master had commanded it. And that's what terrified them the most. The audience, aliens from every corner of the galaxy, had come to see a spectacle. They had come to mock, to laugh, to watch a weakling fall. Instead, they had watched a god being born. Because that's what this was. This wasn't just an animal anymore. It was something designed, honed, perfected. And worse. It was loyal. Obedient. Controlled. The kind of creature that only humans could create. The announcer, who had spent the entire match taunting the human, tried to speak. He tried to turn this into a joke, to pretend it had all been part of the show. But when he opened his mouth, nothing came out. Because how do you mock something that just rewrote the laws of power? The human stepped forward. Slowly. Calmly. And every alien in the arena flinched. Not the creature. The human. Because they understood something now. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't luck. This wasn't some freak mutation or twist of fate. This was planned. This was engineered. Humans had done this on purpose. And that meant. What else were they hiding? What else were they waiting to unleash? The reptilian warrior lowered its head, too afraid to meet the human's eyes. And just like that. The war ended before it even began. The day they feared humanity. The arena was no longer a battlefield. It was a graveyard. Not of bodies. Of arrogance. The reptilian warrior, once the undefeated champion, knelt before the human's feet. It wasn't dead, but it might as well have been. Its pride, its power, its certainty in its own superiority, all of it was gone. The crowd, once roaring with laughter, now refused to make a sound. Not because they were in awe of the small creature that had won. But because they finally understood something terrible. It was never about the creature. It was about the human. The man had never moved. He had never lifted a finger. He had never needed to. While they had laughed, while they had mocked, he had been watching. Calculating. Waiting. For what? For this exact moment. The moment they all realized what humans were capable of. Not brute force. Not raw power. Something far worse. Control. The pet, no, the weapon, had never disobeyed. Not once. Even in the height of battle, even when it had every reason to kill, it had listened. Because humans didn't create beasts. They created soldiers. Weapons that could think. Adapt. Learn. And worst of all, they created them to be loyal. That's what terrified the aliens the most. If a single human could raise something like this. What else were they hiding? The announcer, his voice once dripping with mockery, now trembled. Disqualified, he finally managed to say. This match is over. No one cheered. Because no one felt like they had won. The human didn't argue. He simply knelt beside his creature, running a hand along its fur that was already shifting back to its harmless, soft state. It had evolved to win. And now, it had evolved back. Because that's what humans did. They adapted. And if today had been proof of anything, it was that no species in the galaxy could adapt faster. The war had ended before it began. And the aliens knew. Humanity had already won. When legends are born. No one spoke. No one moved. Because what could they say? The arena, once a place of blood and spectacle, felt like a tomb. Not because of the defeated reptilian warrior. Not because of the battle. But because something far greater had died today. Their ignorance. The laughter. The mockery. The belief that humans were weak, that their ways were foolish, that their strange, fragile pets were nothing more than a joke, all of it had been buried beneath the weight of the truth. The human had never needed to fight. He had never needed to defend himself. Because the moment he stepped into this arena, he had already won. And now, the aliens knew. They all knew. Humans weren't the strongest species. They weren't the fastest. They didn't have claws, or fangs, or scales thick enough to stop bullets. But they had something worse. They had patience. They had foresight. They had the ability to turn something small and harmless into something unstoppable. And if they could do this with a pet, what could they do with an army? A shudder passed through the alien spectators. They weren't looking at just one man anymore. They were looking at a warning. A reminder. A message from humanity itself. Laugh at us if you want. Underestimate us if you must. But when the time comes, when we evolve, you won't be laughing anymore. The human turned, his pet at his side. The match was over. But the legend was just beginning. And as they walked away, the aliens knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the last time they would hear the name of humanity. Not by a long shot.